Hi and welcome to our lunch webinar with Mr. Lukas Foljanty, who will introduce us in his work about on-demand transport, ride-pooling, DRT, and microtransits. So he will give us some information about his work. And I'll show each picture here. So I will give you some information after the presentation. We will have a dialogue or questionnaire. So if you want any questions, please write them in the chat or pull up your hand. And I will keep that in short order to who wants to ask. And after that, I will give you some short information about coming webinars and other information from Swedish Public Transport Association, or as we call it in Swedish, Svensk Kollektivtrafik. So please be welcome, Mr. Lukas Foljanty. What have you to talk about us? To us. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for having me here today. Let me just quickly share my screen so that we can get going. And here we go. So the presentation that I want to give to you today is a mix of two things. One is to lay the land a little bit of where the on-demand transport service at the moment stands in the public transport industry in general, on a global scale, but also drilling down a little bit more into Europe here. But then also discuss a little bit what it takes to ensure the success of such services, because I think we are approaching a phase where this is on one hand still a very, very strong trend, which is something which a lot of public transport agencies all over the world are really considering as a important building block in the redefinition of their services. But at the same time also where we see some challenges in how to actually make those services sustainable, also from an economic and financial perspective. With that said, let me just very briefly introduce myself with a couple of words about myself, so just that you have a little bit of an idea who I am and why I'm speaking to you today. My name is Lukas Foljanty. I am currently working at the Routing Company, a software technology firm in the space of on-demand transport solutions, where I'm leading the European business development team. I have been, however, in this space for quite a while now. For over 6 years, I've been with different technology companies in this space before, some also in the very early stages of the market. So in a way, have been witnessing, let's say, the inception and growth, and maybe in some ways also evolution of this market and this mode of mobility altogether. Prior to being in the on-demand transport space, I have been a consultant for public transport agencies and operators, especially in the German-speaking markets. And so my background really is in public transportation, which is why I continue to be very, very intrigued and excited about on-demand transport as well, because I really think that it's one very good instrument in making public transport more attractive, helping it overcome some of its systemic challenges, but also something where I think in the bigger scope of things where on-demand transport really has a chance to hopefully get more people switch from individual modes of transport to shared modes of transport. Maybe one last work, which is also the source for some of the charts I will be showing and discussing in a moment. I am publishing a quarterly market report on the on-demand transport market on LinkedIn, which I think has now some good number of readership, where I try to cover recent trends and also the outlook of the market, where I discuss the challenges, but also maybe the opportunities. And if you are interested in some more insights into that, which maybe I cannot cover due to the limited time today, then please feel free to either reach out or just also check out my LinkedIn profile, which I will have on the final slide here of this presentation, so that you can then maybe just read some of the articles. And once again, please, if you have any sort of follow-up questions, then don't hold back and reach out to me via LinkedIn or via email. With that said, let's jump in. And starting sort of from the bird's eye view, or this would probably be more the orbital view here. On-demand ride pooling, as I like to call it, which again is just one term which synonymously can be also replaced with demand responsive transport, with microtransit in North America, with various variations of let's say the on-demand theme, with maybe bus, shuttle, just in general mobility. And so please, just when I say on-demand ride pooling, just make sure that you kind of understand that this means this entire concept around sharing trips, but nevertheless still be very, very responsive and flexible in the way it's being done. And I will discuss this again in a little bit more detail in a moment. But again, let's start with a high-level view here. And that, I think, here shows very impressively how big this market has grown over the last, roughly 10 years, I would say. These are now the numbers for the currently active projects. So, these are now around about 750 projects that are live at this moment as we speak. But since, let's say, the start of this this new type of demand responsive transport, we have seen now close to 1,300 of these projects being deployed. And clearly not all of them will continue endlessly. Some have been pilots which by design had a sort of end date, and some of them have been renewed, others have not been. And I think part of the question why they might have not been renewed will be around the question of efficiency, and that is one topic I want to discuss today a little bit. But I think nevertheless it shows very clearly that this is a global phenomenon first, and secondly that we have two regions in the world where this has been especially dominant, being North America and Europe specifically. If you now kind of want to have a closer look at the growth trend, as I mentioned, it's a phenomenon that is not that old, or at least comparatively to how public transport has been operating for many, many decades. But still, within those last 10 or 11 years, we have especially seen a very, very strong growth in the number of such services being launched in the last 5-6 years. And this growth has been also on one hand growing on a year-to-year basis, but also has been very steady. And so I think looking at numbers for this year to date, I expect the 2023 to be equally strong, or maybe even stronger than 2023. I mean, we're a little bit over the half of the year now, so there's still some ground to cover, but by experience, the second half of the year actually sees more services deployed than the first half. Again, the geographical distribution of launches is very much in line with the map I showed you before, and this is also rather consistent and let's say also stable. So North America and Europe are the driving markets for this, followed by Japan, and then rest of world being at the moment still a little bit slower, but there we are also seeing interesting developments in emerging markets and other regions as well. When we now think about, how is actually on-demand ride pooling being deployed, we can see that this is again now the currently running services, but actually this pie chart will not look radically different if we would now look into all services that have ever been deployed. We can see that it's definitely something where, other other use cases besides public transport are also being trialed. Some of them are also seeing good momentum, be it school and university transport, or also the non-emergency and paratransit transportation market, which I think is also a very interesting segment, especially if it is possible to maybe actually combine these with regular public transport on-demand services. But nevertheless, this pie chart, of course, shows very, very clearly that the biggest and most relevant use case is in public transport. And I think, quite frankly, it's also easy to see why, ultimately. On-demand ride pooling in its modern form, so being real-time, being very, very responsive to the actual demand, really sits, from my point of view, in the sweet spot between the efficiency of a regular, scheduled, fixed line public transport service and the convenience and flexibility of individual modes of transport. And let's just quickly kind of discuss this in a little more more context here. I think it's very clear that mass transit, as it's called, at least in North America, let's say, I think is very clearly extremely strong at getting a lot of people on main corridors in high capacity vehicles, from A to B between main stations, and therefore it's very clear that this backbone functionality will also not go away. On the other hand, I think it's also important to acknowledge that public transport, from a systemic point of view, has challenges when it comes to the finer distribution of people, be it the first last mile challenge that public transport just faces principally, but also just covering low demand times and areas, but also, quite frankly, to address hardcore car users ultimately, because I think it is still something where, even though maybe within maybe the mobility bubble, it feels sometimes like post-car ownership is just around the corner. I think reality and statistics prove that to be not really the case. So I think it's still important to continue really understanding the needs of car users, and also thinking of what we can actually offer as a attractive and convenient and readily available alternative, because I think availability is really one key point why cars are still so dominant. And so in the sort of, let's say, left-hand side here on this graphic, you therefore, of course, find very traditional ways of traveling, like the car, the taxi, but of course also more, let's say, individual and active forms of transport, like the bike, kick scooters and stuff, and all of these also in shared form or privately owned form. And on-demand ride pooling in real time sits in the middle. So I think this is really important to keep in mind, because I think this is really the key value proposition, to find the right balance between the convenience and flexibility of individual modes of transport and the efficiency of getting as many people as possible with as few vehicles as possible to where they want to go. Now, there's a challenge, however, and that is exactly getting that high utilization, realizing that high utilization also in on-demand services. And so what I did here is to compile some services across the globe, anonymize these, because it's really now not about pointing fingers here, but to say, okay, if we look at some of the maybe also more prominent examples of on-demand services, how do they actually perform with regards to passengers per vehicle revenue hour? And as you can see here, again, this is just a limited sample here, and clearly, if we would maybe widen the sample, it might look a little bit different. But I think the overall theme here is quite reflective of many services across the globe, that we see not very high utilization rates. And the challenge that comes with that is especially a challenge of justification, because on-demand services, I think, in principle, add a lot of value. There's a societal value when it comes to inclusivity, accessibility, just also in general to just enhance public transport with more flexible, more convenient modes of transport, fill some white spots in the network. All these kind of things, they matter. They should not be disregarded here. However, especially if we are starting with maybe piloting something, at some point in time, also on-demand services will need to answer the question of how do they compare to, be it a fixed line public transport service, or also to maybe shared taxi services, where you maybe still have a demand responsiveness in it, but you don't actually offer the service all the time, but only, basically let a taxi pick somebody up if they want to travel. And this is really important, I think, to keep in mind, because otherwise, at some point, it will be hard to ensure that on-demand services become and stay, a part of the regular public transport offer, and not just, let's say, some innovation playground, some piloting, etc. But now the question is, why is it so hard to actually get a vehicle filled in an on-demand service? And I think here it's important to kind of look a little bit into the mathematical challenge here. And please bear with me, it will be very, very light what I'm telling you here, because I'm not a mathematician. Our founders of the company, they are graduates from very respectable universities. They came up with all these, so they could now discuss this with a much more depth when it comes to mathematical thing. But I think in my very simplistic terms, it still kind of gets across the key challenges here. So if you think of shared mobility, where you just need to match one passenger with a driver, with a vehicle, like you will find with ride-hailing services, Uber, FreeNow, Lyft, whatever, it's not that hard ultimately. I mean, it's then a question of supply. So how many vehicles do I have, and what would be acceptable waiting times to have somebody pick up that passenger? But other than that, it's actually not a very hard problem to solve. But the moment you try to combine multiple passengers in a vehicle, the possible pickup drop-off sequences that can actually be, just from a mathematical standpoint, be which need to be evaluated, very quickly become, absurdly large. So at only 20 passengers that you want to try to combine in a vehicle, you're looking at, and I had to actually look up the name of that number. It's septillion. It's a septillion. It's close to 800 septillion possible sequences, and that of course requires very, very sophisticated algorithms, because this needs to happen still in real time. If you can, of course, do that in a completely pre-booked scenario, then you have, of course, the means to just allow systems to optimize over and over again until they arrive at a good sort of combination of booking and of requests and vehicles. But if you want to do this in real time, this is a really, really hard nut to crack. And so this is, I think, also what I would very clearly recommend to keep in mind when thinking about maybe deploying a new on-demand service is, how can you actually in real time ensure that the system will be able to cope with that challenge here? And so, these are now 3 questions that I would, just recommend you to keep in mind, and maybe ask if you are setting out to scoping a new on-demand service. And the one question that, very first and foremost is that, how would the system actually deal with that very, very large number of combinations that are, that purely mathematically are suddenly it's faced with? And that in a limited time budget. So the time budget here, again, from a real-time perspective, is no more than maybe 30 seconds. So that's really where a passenger, or also maybe a call center agent, would open the platform and say, I want to go from A to B. And the time until a booking is confirmed, that's really the time budget that the algorithm has to find a good match. And that is usually not more than 30 seconds or so, right? And so how does the system do that? And so one way which here is clearly a way to address that is to ensure that the algorithm is actually capable of going through these sequences and very, very quickly determine which of these sequences is actually promising to keep actually looking into in more detail. So the key point here is to discard as many combinations as possible, just to ensure that that the remaining combinations, the remaining sequences that are then actually thoroughly assessed do have enough promise to actually provide a good match between the booking and the vehicle. Now, the point here, which is important to still emphasize, is that it should not, just kind of be satisfied once it has found that combination. The second point here, the second question to ask is, how often does the system re-optimize? The problem is that if you have this optimization only done once in the moment of the booking, then the vehicle that will be assigned to pick up this passenger has suddenly this passenger with his individual waiting time constraints, maximum trip time, maximum detour times. These are kind of the usual service level parameters that you would set in a service. Let's say 15 minutes maximum waiting time, maybe a multiplier of 1.5 for the detour, and then also maximum total trip time. These are the constraints that the algorithm will need to reflect on an individual basis. But if you now have that passenger assigned strictly to one vehicle, this vehicle will struggle to pick up a lot of other people, because everybody who has this kind of individual constraints, and if you overlay them, then the window in which the algorithm can actually optimize and pool more people together very quickly gets very, very small. And so again, a recommendation here is to make sure that the system is capable to re-optimize even after the booking is placed. So what that means is that basically a booking, even though guaranteed, and also guaranteed within a window of a pickup of, let's say, again, those 50 minutes or so that we discussed just before, is still able to actually maybe push over that booking to a different vehicle, because maybe other bookings has come into that actually can be better served now in another vehicle, or real-time traffic situation has changed, so the vehicle is maybe delayed. So if I then push over that booking to a different vehicle, I can still keep that within the promised pickup time, and I can still also, by doing so, ensure that the vehicles are actually highly utilized. And the last piece here is then how to still manage underutilized vehicles, because technology is one side, but demand patterns, of course, are the other side. So if you have maybe a time of the service operations where you just don't have that high demand, how can you still ensure that the vehicle is not traveling, underutilized? And one answer there is to ensure that the system will also forecast demand and then also reflect that in the routing of the vehicles, so that the vehicles will then also either be sent through an area where demand is forecasted to pop up soon, to ensure that vehicle utilization is increased and maximized, so to speak. Or if they are completely empty, then that they are actually sent there and idle in that area. And idling here doesn't mean to go around the block like Uber, for instance, would do, but it means that you then, of course, previously need to define waiting areas where the vehicle can then park, shut down the motor, just do that in a way that's not disruptive to the environment and the people around. But by doing so, then also ensure that the vehicle is very close by where demand will pop up sometime soon. And this is, of course, now been rather theoretical. I acknowledge that. And so let's just look at one example, which I believe is a very good example what can be achieved if you keep these things in mind. And this is a service that is operated on our technology, on the routing company's technology in Andorra. Has been running since July 2021, so a little bit over 2 years now. And here we see consistently over 8 passengers per vehicle revenue hour, close to 9 passengers even. And that is across all times of the day, across all vehicles in the entire fleet. And I think this is a very, very strong testimony to what's possible, because I think ultimately what this example shows is if you keep that in mind, if you do that, also of course with the right balance of supply and demand, and many other factors that clearly also matter. I'm of course acknowledging that it's not just a matter of technology; it's also a matter of where and how you deploy a service. But nevertheless, if you have the right, let's say, demand and service design set up, then of course you need to ensure that the technology is also capable of delivering those results. And If you do, I think on-demand transport has a very, very important part to play in the transformation of our mobility systems to actually really ensure that more people are willing to stop using their car, really consider public transport, and really ensure that on-demand then delivers on the promise of flexibility and convenience, but also at the same time of utilization, efficiency, and productivity. And with that said, I want to stop here to also allow at least a couple of questions. But again, please reach out to me on whatever channel you please, and then happy to discuss this more in detail, both from, let's say, the underlying technologies, but also what are important factors to ensure a successful deployment and impactful results of on-demand services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lukas. Any questions or any subjects you want to discuss with Lukas? So please show your hand or write in the chat. Is there anyone who have experience of some problems like Lukas have discussed about here? Okay, I will share my screen again and see. Please feel free to ask any questions here. So here, if we don't have any question for the moment, then I show some information. And here we have the next webinar, which reads in Swedish here. And it will be the 22nd of September, 22 September. It's about neuropsychic disabled when you have paratransit or vad säger det på svenska? Neuropsykiatriska funktionsnedsättningar vid bedömning av färdtjänst och riksfärdtjänst. Och det är Annika Brar från Region Stockholm som är habiliteringsläkare som ska göra. Och det är Svenska färdtjänstföreningen som håller webbinariet, men vi från Svensk kollektivtrafik ser till att göra det möjligt rent i vår tekniska plattform och är medarrangör då i den. Där finns det fortfarande möjlighet att anmäla sig till och skicka in frågor. Och nästa riktiga webbinarium här kommer Padam från Siemens Mobility, eller Padam är ett företag under Siemens Mobility också, och prata om demand responsive transport och autonomous vehicle fordon då. Och om ni har fler ämnen och tips på föreläsare så får ni gärna höra av er till mig på detta via mejlen. If you have any further interest in subjects or persons who would like to speak, please get contact with me at my mail. And I will also make an announcement about our core about serviceresor, översiktskurs serviceresor som kommer hållas i vecka 5 den 29 januari till 2 februari 2024. Och det är andra året vi kör och den var väldigt uppskattad. Så tipsa era kollegor eller chefer, medarbetare eller andra som kan vara intresserade som jobbar med services och demand responsive transport i sin dagliga verksamhet. Oavsett om det är på beställarsidan, utförarsidan, uppdragssidan eller utvecklingssidan för system. Och det finns mer information på Svensk kollektivtrafiks kalender att kunna anmäla sig till dem här så att man hittar länkar där vidare. Och detta webbinarium, this webinar and the earlier webinars you will find at our YouTube channel. So please give it a look if you want to see some of the previous. Så titta på den här sidan på YouTube så kan ni hitta tidigare av våra webbinarium och annan information som finns intressant. Och till sist vill jag då igen, for the last I want to thank you again, Lukas, And here is also a survey about the webinar. So for everybody to pick your phone, scan the QR code, and you will get to one easy short formula for the webinar for evaluation. And I will in that also give a good thank you again, Lukas, for this time.
Thank you for having me. And again, if you have
I have a
please reach out.
thing in the chat here now. Yeah, and it's we have a question from Carolina Philipson. We will take this first.
Okay, yeah.
The calculations regarding the different combinations, are they based on free access to transport, or are there some restrictions regarding when a transport can be demanded? Some sort of timetable question.
So no, this is a purely fully flexible setup. So the combinations there would be that basically within a defined area and of course within a, let's say, service times, which could be, I don't know, from 8 in the morning to 8 in the afternoon or so, evening or something, that in that time people can sort of at any time book when they want to travel. So this is a fully flexible kind of approach. But with that said, of course, we acknowledge that also some of these services will be, let's say, more sort of semi-fixed, where you might also need to actually have a defined stops, maybe where the vehicle needs to, arrive at some certain time. This is what we can also do. But the number that I showed you was for a fully flexible approach.
Did you get the answer clear, Carolina? Yeah, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, then we will end this webinar. And thank you again, everybody, for participating. And perhaps I will see you at the 22nd of September also for the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.